why belly breathing is wrong and why it's not helping you and why it could also be hindering you. It could be hindering your performance, it could be hindering your movement. It could also be creating dysfunctions that you might not have even been aware of, and also playing into dysfunctions that you might not have been aware of. And that's from a postural perspective and also from a movement perspective, because remember, posture is what really affects our movement. And if we have dysfunctions within our posture, we have dysfunctions within our breathing, we probably will likely have dysfunctions with our movement. Now, some of these things are obviously a chicken and egg scenario. We never really know what came first. We just know what is. We know what's happening at the time, and therefore we know what we need to do to fix the problem. Now, I wanted to talk to you about why belly breathing is wrong, and I'm going to start off by talking about the mechanics of breathing. So if we start off and we talk about the muscles of inspiration, so the muscles that help us to inspire, to breathe in. The diaphragm. Now the diaphragm is a muscle that pulls downwards, and it pulls down only to the bottom of the ribs. Now if you think about, this is a very, very crude drawing, and I'm not an artist, I'm not a good drawer, I'm terrible, as you can see. Now I've just drawn on here like 5 ribs, and there's going to be a few more than that, of course, and there's some floating ribs at the bottom. Now the way that the ribs, they go into kind of like an arch shape. Now the diaphragm does not pull down below the bottom of those ribs, so it doesn't encroach on the abdomen, on the space that is your abdomen. So there is no need to distend the abdomen in order to make space for the diaphragm to contract. So if the diaphragm only goes to the bottom of the ribs and there's no need to distend the abdomen, then there's no real need for belly breathing. That's kind of it in a nutshell, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper than that because I want to talk about 2 different things on top of that. Now, you've got the diaphragm, which pulls down to the bottom of the ribs. That creates the vacuum. You've got the intercostals, the external intercostals, which pull the ribs upwards and expands them outwards. And that's called a bucket handle movement. So if you imagine that these ribs are like the handle of a bucket, and the bucket goes upwards, then you can imagine all of those ribs getting pulled upwards. Now the serratus anterior and the serratus posterior superior, those are the muscles that are just around the side of the ribs here, as well as the intercostals. There's muscles around the side of the ribs here that are also called the serratus anterior, that's in the front, and the serratus posterior superior that are in the upper back. They also act on the ribs. They also act on that bucket handle movement, and they expand the ribs backwards and forwards, anterior, posterior. Now the scalenes here and the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid, the scalenes are involved in lifting. This is supposed to be a neck here. Like I said, I'm not a good person, a good artist, so my drawings are terrible. I will post some pictures on this as well, some screenshots. But the scalenes attach up into the neck, up into the, around the top of the jaw, into the neck, and also the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid. Now the S and the M, the sterno is the sternum in your ribs, and the mastoid is the mastoid process, which is where the SCM attaches to. Those muscles lift, or the scalenes lift the ribs upwards, and the SCM actually lifts the sternum upwards. So it creates like a pump handle. So if you imagine a pump doing this, that's kind of what we see when we have the sternum lifting up. Now all of these muscles expand, elevate, and expand outwards the ribs. It's not the abdomen. The abdomen doesn't need to expand in order for all of this to occur, and we don't want it to occur, because when you're running and you're breathing, there is no way that you want the abdomen to be distended, because you need the abs and the obliques to come into the central midline, which is called the linea alba, And you need those muscles to all come into a point at the linea alba and around the side of the linea alba and around the side of the rectus abdominis, the six-pack. You need those muscles to create a really kind of a solid attachment point in the middle, because we don't have a spine in the front of our abdomen. So we need those muscles to create the stability around the lumbar section of our body. Now, the expiration muscles, the ones that help us breathe out, kind of ignore this one for a second, the abdominals. Just ignore that for 1 second. We're going to come back to that in a minute. The external obliques, those are the ones that pull the ribs downwards and forwards. The internal intercostals, remember the external intercostals are inspiration muscles. The internal intercostals are expiration muscles. The lats as well, and the serratus posterior inferior, they are lower down in the thoracic spine. Okay. Now if you think about all of these muscles here, specifically these ones and the lats, if you just sit there where you are for a moment and cough, feel which muscles were involved in coughing. Now we call that forced expiration. So see down here it says forced. Okay, so quiet breathing, we're going to go through this whole section in a second. Quiet breathing is the diaphragm. It is not forced. So if we're doing quiet breathing and that involves the diaphragm and it's not the abs, then we don't need to be distending the abs at all. We don't need to be distending the abdomen at all. Now, let's go down to here. So we talked about the mechanics, inspiration, expiration. We talked about the bucket handle of the ribs. So that's the intercostals, the external intercostals and the serratus anterior, and also the scalenes are involved in that. And then the sternocleidomastoid is the pump handle action where the sternum lifts upwards. Now you can do that yourself. You can use your own breathing as an example for this. Okay, just sit there and breathe. You'll feel exactly what's going on. And so now we come down to here. So the floating ribs, I haven't put those on here. They're lower down. Okay, the last two ribs, floating ribs. They externally rotate. Think about it. When you breathe inwards, your ribs go outwards. Those floating ribs, they externally rotate on inhalation. So as you're breathing in, you're inhaling air. Those ribs are externally rotating. They're doing this. They're expanding. They're externally rotating. That also has an impact on your hip movement because it has an impact on the obliques. An impact on the obliques, okay? So down here, inspiration muscles cause a stretch reflex of the abdominals. If you inspire enough, you will get a stretch reflex of the abdominals. That's the six-pack of abdominals, the ones that go down in the abdomen. Now, the ribs expand and laterally rotate, that's external rotation, to create space. That creates the vacuum. There's no lungs in your abdominal cavity. Now that one's huge. There's no lung tissue in your abdominal cavity. So we don't need to belly breathe. We don't need to create space down there in the abdomen. There is nothing going on down there that's involved with breathing. Okay? This one with the stretch reflex. Now, if we distend the abdomen, we create the situation of an anterior pelvic tilt and the hip flexors take the strain. That's because there's a reason why your hip flexors are taking the strain. It's because you don't have your abdominals engaged anymore. You've distended your abdomen, so there's nothing else to hold everything in place apart from the hip flexors. So you've got your psoas, your iliacus, your TFL. They're all going to take the strain along with your obliques as well. Now, when you do this belly breathing and you distend the abdominals, you create a stretch reflex in the muscles that wrap around your abdomen. So not the six-pack of abdominals, not the six-pack, not the rectus abdominis, but you create the the stretch reflex in the muscles that wrap around, and it's the wrong ones. You don't need to be creating a stretch reflex in those ones. So quiet breathing is diaphragmatic. It's not forced, so there's no abdominal involvement there. Expiration is relaxed until forced, and that's when you need the abdominals. Distending the abdomen, you get an APT, an anterior pelvic tilt, and the hip flexors take the strain. Okay? So there is no need for belly breathing, and belly breathing, like I said, can cause problems on its own. It's also a dysfunction of another dysfunction. So if you're having to resort to a belly breathing movement, that means that all of this has been lost. All of this has been lost. So you're probably stiff. You're probably super stiff up in the thoracic region, and you can't access these very well. And that's why you're having to distend through the abdomen, because you can't get any rib elevation. You can't get any rib expansion. And part of the reason why your neck muscles are so tight is because more than likely your lats, where did I put your lats here, and your abdominals are so tight. These muscles, specifically your lats, they will pull your ribs down, and they will pull your shoulders downwards towards your pelvis. That will make it very difficult for these muscles up here, your breathing muscles up here, to lift up the ribs. And if it's harder for your ribs and all of these muscles, the scalenes and SEMs, to lift the ribs up, then this isn't going to happen very freely. It's not going to happen very easily. Okay? So, if you are belly breathing, you're welcome to carry on belly breathing. You're very welcome to. It's up to you. I'm just giving you the information. I'm just telling you the reasons why I don't do it. I don't tell anyone else to do it, and I would advise you not to do it. And that is my take on why belly breathing is wrong. Any questions? Post them below, of course. I will always try and endeavour to answer all of your questions. I'm going to post some screenshots up with this. Just remember, if you've got tightness in some muscles, you're going to get tautness in other muscles. So if you're sitting there suffering with hip flexor tightness, or tautness even, some of them, and you're sitting there suffering with neck pain and shoulder pain when you run, have a look at your breathing mechanics, and you're probably got some of this tightness in your lats, in your serratus posterior inferior going on. You've probably got tightness in your obliques, and that's causing these muscles in your neck, scalenes and SCMs, to be taut and therefore weak and unable to do their job. Okay? There's always a reason, and belly breathing is a dysfunctional adaptation to an already poor breathing mechanic.